In the Spanish province of Aragon lies the desolate agricultural village of Fuentes de Todos, steeped in poverty and subjected to the ravages of an unrelenting sun. Fuentes de Todos, which means everybody's fountains, an ironic reminder that at least the water can be shared by all. So it is, and so it has always been. Yet there was one time when, out of this place of poverty and isolation, this heritage of a country stifled by political corruption, there emerged a man who was to become one of the greatest artists Spain would ever know, Francisco José de Goya y Lucientes. In this bleak village, Goya was born. It was the year of our Lord, 1746. King Carlos III reigned, and the Inquisition still shrouded the land. Here Goya spent his early years. José Goya, his father, was a gilder. His mother, Doña Gracia Lucientes, was of minor Spanish nobility. In a few years, Goya and his family moved to Zaragoza, the commercial and artistic center of Aragon, where it was easier to earn a living and educate children. Never known to be a good student, Goya was encouraged to develop his early interest in drawing by studying under a local master, José de Luzán y Martínez. At 17, the ambitious young Goya left for Madrid, where he hoped to earn his reputation. For years, there had been no significant artistic innovations in Spain. But now, in court circles, there was a new concern about art. King Carlos III, wanting to embellish the newly built royal palace, summoned to the Spanish court two famous artists from Italy. They represented separate and distinct styles and were to compete for the monarch's favor. The Venetian Giovanni Battista Tiepolo was commissioned to decorate various rooms in the palace. His Rococo decorations were airy compositions, full of movement and freely painted in light, glowing colors. Anton Raphael Mengs, German by birth, was a neoclassicist. His style of a more formal type of portraiture so impressed the king that he appointed Mengs director of the Royal Academy of San Fernando, which exercised strict authoritarian control over the fine arts. Twice Goya was to apply to the Academy for a scholarship, only to fail on both occasions. Eager to learn the accepted style of the court, he began to study with a painter of the king, Francisco Valleo, whose sister he would later marry. After a journey to Rome, where he learned the art of fresco, Goya returned to Zaragoza. Soon he received his first commission to decorate the vault for the Church of the Virgen del Pilar. His work was well received and more commissions followed. As Goya's popularity increased, he became one of Aragon's leading artists. In 1773, marriage to Josefa Valleo. It was later said of their relationship, "In the 38 years of his married life, his wife passes like a shadow, all but unperceived." Shortly after his marriage, Goya received his first royal commission when he was called to Madrid by Mengs and Valleo to assist with the working designs or cartoons for the royal tapestry manufactory. portrait of the king, traditional biblical and mythological themes were to be discarded in the tapestry designs. Instead, the compositions were to be based on the pleasures and realities of contemporary Spanish life. During the next 20 years, Goya was to deliver 63 cartoons for the weavers to copy. The cartoons, actually oil paintings on canvas, reveal Goya's rapid development from a stilted, somewhat awkward style influenced by Mengs and Bayeu to a lighter, more decorative and more naturalistic idiom. In a very short time, Goya's work began to show amazing mastery. He liked to record the flamboyant majas and majos, the night revelers of contemporary Madrid. He also began to look at the humbler aspects of Spanish life with the keen observation that he would employ throughout his career. In the Blind Guitar Player, along with his devising of the scene and rendering of the characters, Goya developed a careful composition that is seldom found in the cartoons prior to this time. Warmly praising Goya's work, Mengs once said, "He is an active member of the profession, rich in talent and spirit, promising ever new progress in his art." Received by King Carlos III, Goya painted his portrait the following year. The painting is somewhat informal, frank, yet kind and respectful. More importantly, it shows what Goya had learned during his visits to the royal palace through viewing the work of the great Spanish master, Velázquez. Though Goya's petition for the position of court painter was rejected, he was elected to the Academy of San Fernando. Increased recognition came with a commission to paint the Sermon of Saint Bernard for the Church of San Francisco el Grande in Madrid. Goya included himself in the painting, as he was to do many times thereafter. In 1783, Goya was commissioned to paint the Count of Floridablanca, chief minister of the king. This is a conventional 18th century portrait, intended to flatter and to emphasize the importance of the sitter. Again, Goya appears in the picture. Perhaps he realized the recognition he might gain from painting such a prominent figure as the prime minister. Though the work was stiff and heavy-handed, it served immediately to consolidate Goya's reputation, providing his sought-after entrance into court circles. Then, in 1786, Goya's ambition triumphed. Carlos III appointed him court painter. This meant he must supply oil paintings and frescoes at the command of the court, as well as make cartoons for the tapestry factory. Of this period, he was later to write, "I had achieved for myself an enviable way of life." More portraits were commissioned. Among the fashionable ladies of the court was the Marquesa de Pontejos. Goya observed the fragility and affectation of her appearance and painted with care and brilliance every detail of her ornamental dress. Reducing his earlier use of splashes of color, Goya began to employ a more monochromatic palette, more appropriate to an austere court lady. The blue-green trees, the blue lavender skies, the silver grays and pinks of her costume helped to create a restrained atmosphere of dignity and social position. In the portraits that followed, The sitter begins to stand out against a background that is devoid of accessories. These portraits do not recall joyfulness, as many of the tapestry cartoons do. Now they begin to contain what would become intrinsic in Goya's work, a closer, more critical look at reality and the inner character of his sitters. In this pose, stiff and formal, Goya shows how even the children were trapped in the court tradition. The Duke and Duchess of Osuna, wealthy patrons of the arts from one of Spain's most illustrious families, became Goya's great benefactors. Goya has caught in their faces, especially the eyes, something vital that contrasts with the stiffness of their dress. Even when Goya painted children, he revealed the restraint and aristocratic dignity of the age. After a 6-year interval, Goya resumed his work on the cartoons for the tapestry manufactory. He began to paint with increased independence. The mood is light-hearted, the handling of color and light effects more subtle, the figures more naturalistic and vivacious. Yet, in some of the cartoons, there seems to be a profound change in the painter's spirit as he depicts the harsher realities of everyday life. For his patrons, the Duke and Duchess of Osuna, Goya painted a group of pictures to be hung in their country home, the Alameda. Although these paintings indicate the same luminosity and acute observational sense that Goya brought to the finest of his cartoons, they reflect even more than usual a grace and lightness. Still, a certain social commitment enters into this series as well, marking a radical transformation of the painter's sensibility. That same year, Goya painted the Meadows of San Isidro, a tapestry cartoon that never reached the weaver. Enormous and masterly, it was the greatest of all his designs. In the distance beyond the river is a panorama of Madrid, while in the foreground, people of all ages and social standing are celebrating the annual Saints' Day and enjoying some leisure moments outside the city. Of this painting, Sanchez Canton wrote, "Never in the history of painting, until the appearance of this canvas, had anyone ever reproduced sunlight with so much truth. The picture fully anticipates the most masterly impressionism." When Carlos IV came to the throne in 1789, Goya realized his dream. He was appointed first painter of the royal household, with all privileges. including that of being called excellency. Goya painted himself as a self-assured, elegantly dressed artist standing before his easel. In order to paint into the night, he attached some candles to his headband. "My brush must not see more than I do," he said. Goya was in such demand to do portraits that his duties at the tapestry manufactory were neglected. Criticized by the director, Goya obliged him with the last of his cartoons. Triumphantly, Goya returned to the depiction of the easy and amiable life of the preceding period. But there is a new element added now, as he mockingly examines some of the conventions of Spanish society. Wedding procession is Goya's stab at marriages of convenience, which were very prevalent in Spain at the time. In The Dummy, doll-like girls toss a dummy into the air, a familiar game at Spanish outdoor festivals. But the coquettish girls and the hopelessness of the dummy may be Goya's way of showing the pleasure that women derive from toying with men, a theme that was to recur again and again with increasing savagery. Then, in 1792, the tragic, paralyzing illness that was to leave Goya incurably deaf. But silence was not to be his constant companion, for inside his head were roaring noises, terrifying buzzings that sometimes drove him close to madness. Something changed then in his paintings. They became satirical and bitter. A new kind of reality was tearing at him. He wrote to the director of the Academy that he was now dedicating himself to making observations that ordinarily find no place in commissioned works, in which caprice and invention are not given much freedom. Goya had now given up aiming to please and painted what he chose, dramatizing the conflicts within man's soul. There is nothing light-hearted about these carnival revelers. The mask-like faces are ominously bizarre. For to Goya, the mask was not something that hid the face, but rather that which individually defined it. Now political events began to parallel the horrors in Goya's troubled mind. Carlos IV, fearful that the revolution in France might spread to Spain, had dismissed or imprisoned all men of liberal or enlightened ideas. Among them were some of Goya's closest friends. In spite of his wealth and position in court circles, Goya could no longer feel that life was secure or pleasurable. The smiles of amiable ladies and gentlemen in his earlier works have dissolved into torture-contorted expressions. Subject matter and technique joined to form a new style, peculiar to Goya and alien to the period. The brushwork has become harsh and jagged, almost feverish. There are clots of pigment. A new violence appears, both tragic and grotesque. foreboding of what is to come. Possibly for economic reasons, Goya returned to portraiture. Here, the Duke of Alva, withdrawn, elegant, and like so many Spanish aristocrats, oblivious to the increasing political tensions of Europe. His wife, the proud and eccentric Duchess of Alva, who was to become a prime figure in Goya's personal life. After the death of her husband, the Duchess retreated to her country estate, where she was joined by Goya. In this portrait, though she's still dressed in the black of mourning, Goya paints her in the style of a maja, her stiff, outstretched arm calling attention to a double ring engraved Goya and Alva. The notorious Duchess, playing out her dramatic role, caused Goya much suffering from the torment of his love for her and the frustrations of her inconstancy. But the Duchess was not the only cause for Goya's increasing disillusionment. For under the new king, Spain had deteriorated to the point where the external world seemed to Goya an intensified extension of his own inner turmoil. This turning inward led him to devote himself assiduously to drawing, no longer as an aid to study, but as a goal in itself, the full expression of his inspiration. The sleep of reason produces monsters. With this theme, Goya produced the Caprichos, 80 etchings that prove his mastery in the depiction of irony and sarcasm. Here the artist is asleep with his head on the table, while the monsters of irrationality hover in the air above him. Assaulting man's hypocrisy and woman's fickleness, crying out against society's stupidities and the clergy's inhumanity, Goya made Spanish caricature into an art. Instead of putting masks on his characters, he wedded mask to face. They have now become one. As the series progresses, Goya's images become more and more distorted, as though he is glimpsing another world. as well as stylistically, these etchings are no longer those of the sedate 1700s. For with his artistic indictment of Spanish society, Goya has now stepped forward into the 19th century. In spite of his anti-clericalism, Goya contrived to remain on happy enough terms with the church to continue receiving commissions on religious themes. For one of these, he was charged by the king to decorate the church of San Antonio de la Florida on the outskirts of Madrid. He was asked to illustrate the popular legend of the church's patron saint. Boldly, Goya inverted the usual elements of the decoration of domes and vaults, placing the Gloria in the lowest part and putting on the ring of the drum the story of the miracle. In a significant departure from tradition, Goya set the scene of St. Anthony's miracle not in biblical times, but in contemporary Spain. Surrounding St. Anthony, instead of the conventional saints, are the people from the streets of Madrid, who become actually more fascinating than the miracle that is being performed. In this religious scene, Goya has incorporated his continually developing interest in a deeper, more penetrating perception of humanity. Despite his breaks with convention, Goya remained in favor with the court. He painted the Queen Maria Luisa and her favorite, the unscrupulous Godoy, whom she had appointed chief minister of state. In a gentler vein, Goya painted Godoy's young wife, the Countess of Chinchon, poignantly capturing her loneliness and the pregnancy she shyly tries to conceal. In this portrait, Goya immortalizes the popular actress La Tirana at the peak of her career. Several years later, Goya portrayed the actress again, but here she is old and stout, showing signs of illness. It is in the details of her white dress that Goya's virtuosity is displayed, the likeness of the frills and folds beneath which one senses the presence of a voluminous body. By this time, Goya had become Spain's most sought-after artist. But as Goya's fortunes rose, the Spanish monarchy moved towards doom. Commissioned in 1800 to paint the royal family, Goya created a portrait in which the costumes were so dazzling they detracted from the vulgar and coarsened features of the king and queen. Carlos IV stands, as he did in life, in the shadow of his wife, the ruthless Maria Luisa. With her piercing eyes, she dominates the scene as she did her family and her country. Their young son, Fernando, who would reign over Spain even more disastrously than his father had. Goya peered beneath the surface to reveal the true character of these subjects. But they saw only their rank and their silks and jewels. They are like bad actors on a stage, frozen in vanity and pretense. And in the background, once again, is Goya, observing, recording what he sees. There is a decided uneasiness in this scene, a cogent reflection of the intrigue and upheaval of the times. For a while, Goya seems to have retired from public life, returning to paint for a few private individuals, such as the Count Fernand Núñez. Now his late portrait style developed, as plastic form took precedence over color harmonies. The artist has dispensed with all distracting accessories. The tonality is dark, yet atmospheric. The flesh tones, rosy. Though the painting of nudes was frowned upon in Spanish society, Goya again departs from tradition with this painting of the nude maja. Yet, in the way that the folds of her dress suggest the contours of her body, the clothed maja almost seems to outdo her naked counterpart in sensuality. But now, history intervened. Spanish aristocrats could no longer avoid the turbulent political events that were spreading throughout Europe. Carlos IV abdicated. Fernando VII was proclaimed king. As the Spanish ruling family kept fighting among themselves for power, Napoleon Bonaparte seized the throne, placing upon it his brother, Joseph. On the 2nd of May, 1808, the people of Madrid attacked the occupying French troops. Retaliated with executions on the terrible day of the 3rd of May. It was not until 6 years later that Goya recorded these events. Yet they recall vividly and with great passion the revolt of the Spanish people. For Goya, as for many Spanish intellectuals, there was a struggle between patriotic sentiment and a sympathy with the enlightened ideas of the French. Finally, there was no ambivalence. As war spread, fear, desolation, misery, death, all began to rise over Spain like a giant fist, poised to smash all that lay in its path. The Spanish people rebelled. Powder Grinders is a grim vignette of the guerrilla warfare that had broken out all over Spain. Goya recorded his rage in a series of etchings, The Disasters of War. Until this time, artists had depicted war as a heroic, glorifying act of man. Goya changed this. With these etchings, he showed war the way it really was, in all its horror and devastation. The French tortured and mutilated their prisoners, hacking bodies to pieces even after the men were dead. The Spaniards reacted by doing the same. Women are violated, civilians massacred, children left to starve. The mangled bodies of the dead are piled like rotting garbage. As a Spaniard is dismembered by French soldiers, he says in his agony only, "Por qué? Why?" Reason has indeed disappeared, as Goya had predicted in his Caprichos. Men had turned into monsters. Finally, the war was over. The French withdrew, leaving behind them a country divided, destroyed, sunk in misery. New hope for a liberal constitution was crushed when the exiled Fernando VII returned to the throne, restoring authority to all the old repressive institutions. After 6 years of bloody butchery, Spain was to become even more backward than it had been before. For Goya, the disappointments of the post-war period proved difficult. There were few works for him to do at court. His wife had died, and many of his friends were dead or exiled. For distraction, Goya turned to the corrida. A known aficionado, Goya had often painted bullfight scenes in the past. Now he produced a set of 44 etchings of this beloved art, La Tauromachia. Goya vividly records the exploits and history of the bull ring. The etchings are, as Aldous Huxley writes, little masterpieces of documentary art. was Goya to take part in official or social life. The few portraits he did paint were of professional men or close friends, men like Don Leandro Fernández, the poet, and Fray Miguel Fernández. But sometimes Goya remembered the fascination and beauty of the Majas of Madrid, who had appeared so often in his tapestry designs 30 years earlier, an echo of old gaieties. In 1819, Goya bought a country villa where he lived with Doña Leocadia Zorrilla de Weiss. Though the lady was known to have a shrewish tongue, this must have been of little concern to the deaf Goya. Then, once again, Goya fell desperately ill. From this point on, his world was transformed completely. Here in his home, Quinta del Sordo, the house of the deaf man, his tormented dreams flourished, haunting all his waking hours. He recorded these visions on the walls of his house. It became a macabre museum of the agonies and ambiguities of the world and of his private life. These are Goya's pinturas negras, his black paintings. He wrenches from his soul a sinister world of rich black, pure white, sudden slashes of raw color. A world of outlines and blotches where specific features are obscured by a creative imagination, exposing the dark forces of the human experience. Saturn is about to devour his young son, the terrifying expression of a mind threatened by madness. Saturn, or Kronos, symbol of time, devours all things, our world, our works, ourselves. Perhaps Goya's vision is not madness at all, but a vision of terrible truth, bearable only when it can be expressed. Once again, Goya picked up his engraver's tools to begin a new series of etchings, the disparates, or proverbs. 20 years separate the disparates from the earlier caprichos. These little allegories, the disparates, are more enigmatic and mysterious, the drawing more frenetic. These are the apparitions of his unconscious, the unspeakable torments of his tortured mind. They are his fears and ours. As André Malraux has said, undoubtedly Goya has shown himself in these works to be the greatest interpreter of anguish the West has ever known. Now, as Spain became more repressive, Goya fled to France. An old man now, his sight failing, he settled with Leocadia in Bordeaux. In his last years, he painted the Milkmaid of Bordeaux, revealing an entire palette of translucent greens and blues that blend and flow together. The portrait of Don José Molina was Goya's last canvas. This was the fierce Goya of before, slashing the canvas with his brush, masterfully building up features in rugged planes of color. Vicente López painted this portrait of Goya shortly before Goya's death in Bordeaux in 1828. José Martínez Ruiz, in honoring Spain's three greatest artists, wrote, "Facing reality, Velázquez sees in it what he really sees. El Greco sees in it what he does not see in reality. Goya sees in it what nobody sees." Goya had painted his Spain, capturing forever its evils and its innocence. From his dreams and tortured nightmares came an art broken free from old restraints and conventions. He had paved the way into the 19th century, and now modern art could begin.